Tonight's discussion will focus on the question of police accountability and its role in an effective and fair criminal justice system. While we may not all agree on the best outcome, continuing a dialogue such as this and listening to what both sides have to say will help us gain a better understanding to generate new perspectives. All of these are the hallmarks of good citizenship and also of sound policymaking.
Whether in cities like New York City, where crime is at historic lows and we have a department committed to neighborhood policing, or in Chicago, where there have been tragic jumps in the murder rate, about 10 times what New York City's is now, and an increasing fractious relationship between the police and residents, we're seeing a very open and a very passionate debate about the role and the effectiveness of police and their relationship to the neighborhoods that they're sworn to protect. Shootings by police in Ferguson and Baton Rouge and Minneapolis, captured on tape and very widely distributed, have provided shocking pictures that resonate with long-held views in the African American community that they unfairly bear the brunt of policing and suffer the majority of incidents of deadly violence. Trust is the foundation of civic life. Without it, people don't call the police, they don't show up as jurors, they nullify verdicts. And so we have these different narratives that reflect actually merging desires. Each of us wants for ourselves safety and wants safety for our families. And safety must be co-produced by both neighborhoods and by police.
What we're arguing for, what I am arguing for today, is a motion in favor of holding police more accountable. That means systems and structures that have the power to investigate independently these acts of police violence, that have the power to discipline police officers, that are community-led and driven, structures that are creating misconduct databases and making that data available to the public so that we know who these officers are, what their disciplinary records are, how many complaints have been levied against them, what disciplinary actions have been taken as a response, and that there are laws put in place, like have been put in place in Connecticut, that actually create this type of database and prevent officers from being rehired after they've been fired or resigned under investigation for serious misconduct.
Let's be clear, they know not what they are talking about. Some are abolitionists posing as reformers. They do not believe in policing and believe because the justice system is flawed, no one deserves to be incarcerated. They have fostered the mass delusion that the most dangerous institution in America is the police. Disconnected from reality, they are heedless to the widespread insecurity many live under. They foolishly believe enhancing the threats, sanctions, bullying, and toxicity cops already live under, criminalizing them for the work they do as our surrogate, somehow equates with accountability. If they knew policing at all, they would know that the unrelenting punishment and blame culture they seek means that the cops who are needed on 3rd Street will forever be on 4th Street.
They were tear gassed. They were hit with rubber bullets, many of them my friends. They put their lives on the line. And so many protesters across this country put their lives on the line, facing fierce police resistance, facing resistance from elected leadership all across the country, to make sure that the simple phrase was understood that Black lives matter, that people should not be killed in the streets by the people who are supposed to protect and serve them, that people as taxpayers, as citizens, have the right to govern how and when and where they're policed, particularly folks who are Black, who are most likely to be impacted by policing. And that is simply not the structure that has been created.
We have a gun problem in this country that is staggering. We have a murder culture in this country that's staggering. And we have a huge issue in a city like Chicago not addressed by the elite. We have people not only shooting, they're shooting again. 80% of the shooters in Chicago shoot and shoot again and are seen in the neighborhood again. Are the police willing in this environment to go out and intercept those people at 4 o'clock in the morning and take a risk of being in an officer-involved shooting? Absolutely not. Thanks to the ACLU, in part, stops in Chicago have absolutely collapsed. So-called accountability, where the police have been asked to not only take physical risks, but now fill out huge forms that expose them at every possibility to criminalization, demonization, being fired, being blogged about. The cops are just saying, we don't need to do this anymore, and the people in the neighborhood are suffering because of that.
There is an existing infrastructure here that needs to be addressed that goes beyond just creating a civilian review board that actually requires, one, independent investigations and prosecutions of incidents of police violence. Two, it requires transparency around the records of these police officers, the data. It requires collecting that data, making it publicly available. And it requires accountability measures that are more immediate. So for example, if you have an officer that has a certain number of complaints against them, then they should be flagged in the system. They should be taken off the streets. And there should be a serious investigation as to what's happening. And in fact, if serious misconduct is found, then they should actually not be able to be on the force anymore and not be able to be rehired by another agency.
Why wouldn't we have the most rigorous post-action reviews, examinations of how we could do better?
Because we need humans to do the job, and we're not finding them. In city after city, nobody wants to be on the job. President's Commission 2 years ago did a whole big thing on policing, didn't say where the cops are going to come from.
It may be hard to recruit that many police officers because there are too many police officers. I think, in fact, what we should be doing is thinking about, are there alternative ways that we can be addressing public safety that doesn't involve the police? And in fact, when you look at the data, what it shows is that there are much more cost-effective and less harmful approaches to addressing crime and public safety that the city and many cities across the country simply don't invest enough in.
We got to do a non-ideological approach to this. So people say, you know, I'm a liberal, so everything's got to be filtered through my liberal. That's not the way to do public policy. I don't respectfully think that's not a way to do public policy. There's absolutely room for innovation. There's absolutely room for change. You're going to have to change because you're simply not going to have the people to do the work. But if anybody here lives in the city, you live in the outer boroughs, tonight on your midnight shift in your precinct, there's probably like 8 cops out there out of those 34,000. And if they get tied up, a couple of those cars get tied up on a serious crime, and you need them, you're going to be waiting a long time for them. So the notion that this giant police department has all these people out there, if you know the way it works, it doesn't work that way.
I think when we look at the research, what it shows is that in places where police have been violent, communities are less likely to trust the police, reasonably so, less likely to call the police, and more likely to use alternative measures of resolving their disputes, and that can lead to crime increases. That means that the solution should be, how do we prevent these incidents of police violence that so break the bonds between police and community that they increase the murder rates? And I think ultimately those types of solutions are what we're interested in advancing, and that is all the more difficult to do when from the other side all we hear is that there can be no police accountability, there can be none of these policies implemented. In many ways that contributes to actually worsening the same problems that my partner Eugene wants to confront.
Each of you get to ask one another a question. Since Sam spoke last, Eugene, why don't you ask a question, and then Sam, you can.
Sure, so where are the cops going to come from with college degrees, which would be really ideal? Where do they come from? And if this was a community meeting with crime and disorder, if we had a pattern rapist running around, if we had disorder, if this was public housing, which is a huge percentage of the crime is in public housing, we had the civil liberties union sue to get the cops out of there. Big victory for them, big loss for the residents. But if you were sitting here at a community meeting, second part, what concrete policing or law enforcement strategies would you do to tackle a real crime problem or a real disorder problem?
So my approach wouldn't be first to think about a law enforcement strategy. My approach would be to think about looking at the evidence base of what works and what doesn't work to address crime and disorder. What are the options that are most effective? And oftentimes what you'll find is that's not a law enforcement strategy. Those are the types of strategies that I've been talking about around investing in folks who may have mental illness, folks who have been disconnected and left out. For example, there was a panhandling problem in many cities. I think Portland was one of them. And instead of locking them up, which they had done for years and years, what they decided to do was actually to give these folks, many of whom were homeless, a job picking up trash. And those folks picked up trash. They no longer had to panhandle, and the parks were clean as a consequence. So I think there are more creative solutions that actually connect people to opportunities that don't rely on funneling more and more money into police, and that instead spend that money in a more cost-effective way to address those same problems that go even further. So my question is simple. Eugene, you've talked a lot about public safety. My question is, how do you ensure public safety when the public is afraid of the police?
I don't accept that at all. Do not accept it. Police are one of the most respected institutions in the country, always. And even in bad times, the numbers go up and down. Obviously, in the African-American community, you can look it up in the Gallup poll, the military and the police. We won't even talk about where lawyers are, politicians, right? 65% approval rating for the police, for lawyers, 10%. Police are, because people in the neighborhoods know the cops go out and they roll up their sleeves, they go into ambiguous situations, they take risks, and they solve problems. And that's heroic by anybody's stretching imagination. The police have a violent job. They use violence to do their job. They use coercion to do their job. When they pull you over and they ask you for your license, that's not a request, it's a demand. Okay? They work in an environment where everything's unscripted. If anybody's watching this A&E police show on Friday night, you get a good feel for it. You get a good feel for the way things can deteriorate quickly. Things can go from 0 to 50, and you could be lying seriously injured or killed on the most mundane event. And we have a gigantic gun problem. We have a gigantic violence problem. Not like we haven't had New York City cops killed even in this city. We've had 2 cops killed in running gun battles in the last couple of years. So these are very difficult issues, but we shouldn't be pandering to people. We shouldn't be pretending policing is not what it is. It's a conflictive, adversarial job. That is the way it works. You can say hello to people, but that's what the police do. If you don't want them to do it, they don't have to do that, but they're doing it in our name. They're enforcing laws, and we keep adding laws and ordinances. Every year, our multi-ethnic legislature adds more and more criminal statutes that put the police in conflict with people.
Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight, and thanks to both of our panelists.